Welcome to FCLE Seminar, the podcast where we help you prep for the Florida Civic Literacy Exam. I'm your host, Mercedes Musto, and today we're tackling a pivotal Second Amendment case, McDonald versus Chicago 2010. This has a lot to do with the Supreme Court's previous decision in the District of Columbia versus Heller. That case was in the last episode. So let's unpack the facts, the big question, and the Supreme Court's decision. McDonald versus Chicago 2010. Case background. First, let's set the stage with some facts. See, back in 2008, the Supreme Court made waves with its decision in the District of Columbia versus Heller. Remember, that case was about the handgun ban in Washington, D.C., that ended up being a violation of the Second Amendment. The catch? D.C., it's under federal authority, so the ruling only applied, in like a federal law kind of sense. Or did it? This left a big question mark about what about state gun laws? See, Chicago and Oak Park in Illinois also had very strict gun bans in place. But after the Heller case, people filed lawsuits challenging these bans, arguing that the Second Amendment should apply to the states. This case got complicated way fast and bounced around in the courts before eventually making its way to the Supreme Court. So here's the core question the Supreme Court had to answer. Does the Second Amendment apply to the states through the 14th Amendment? What? More specifically, the 14th Amendment's Privileges and Immunities Clause, or maybe it applies through its Due Process Clause. What? That's too much. You're doing too much. The court's decision. In 2010, the Supreme Court handed down its decision, and it was a game changer. In a ruling, a 5-4 ruling, the court affirmed that the 14th Amendment makes the Second Amendment applicable, and the right to keep and bear arms does apply to the states. Ooh, see, we've got Justice Alito here writing for the majority opinion, and he leaned on the Heller decision, which recognized the right to self-defense as a, quote, fundamental and deeply rooted right in this nation's history, tradition, and ordered liberty. Going back to the Heller case, the court was like this. The 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause, or its Privileges and Immunities of Citizens Clause, makes it applicable to state governments. And basically, Justice Alito, writing for the majority, was like, the Due Process Clause is the way to go. Naturally, not everyone agreed. See, one justice agreed with the Second Amendment and that it applied to the states, but he thought that the Privileges or Immunities Clause was, a better way to go. Then on the flip side, another justice was like, the right to own a firearm isn't a liberty protected by Due Process Clause. And even more so, other justices also dissented with very complex and very valid arguments. This is definitely something to look into. The constitutional principle. Let's back it up. The 14th Amendment references that states cannot deprive citizens of life, liberty, or property without due process or deny them the privileges and immunities of U.S. citizenship. The question was whether one of these clauses makes the Second Amendment binding on the states, not just the federal government. See? Now, remember, Section 1 of the 14th Amendment states this, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Let's review. The key takeaways from McDonald versus Chicago are: number one, the Supreme Court ruled that the Second Amendment, which protects an individual's right to keep and bear arms, applies to the states. This is known as incorporation through the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. Number two, the court emphasized that fundamental rights deeply rooted in American history and tradition, and since the Heller decision recognized the right to self-defense as fundamental, it again applies to the states. Number three, the McDonald decision significantly limits the ability of state and local governments to enact strict gun control laws, such as bans on handguns. And number four, the McDonald decision represents a significant shift in the balance of power between individuals and state governments regarding gun rights. But the bigger picture is this: McDonald versus Chicago 2010 significantly expanded the scope of the Second Amendment rights by making them applicable to the states, ultimately limiting the ability of these states to enact strict gun control measures. It's a landmark case that shows how the Supreme Court wrestles with balancing individual rights, constitutional history, and modern law. That's it for today's Florida Civic Literacy Exam podcast. If you want to dive deeper into McDonald versus Chicago or any other Supreme Court cases, check out resources like oyas.org. Hey, got some opinions about guns and the Second Amendment? Then hit us up in the comments for some civic discourse. Until next time, stay curious and keep asking those big questions. This is your host, Mercedes Musto, signing off.